I'd like to welcome all of you to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions Conversation Circle. Today we are taking up the theme in our Still and Moving Center Almanac of silence and soul memory. And to do so, we are going to be looking from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition at the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. And to do that, we have Kirk Gradin with us to share something of a sequel of what he gave us last year for the holiday of Buddha Purnima, which was the Buddha's search for relieving the suffering of mankind, which culminated in him sitting in meditation for enlightenment. And so today, as that sequel, Kirk is going to talk to us, as I understand it, about his enlightenment and the vision that he gained thereby. Kirk has been a longtime student of the Eastern traditions, has traveled to India. I know that one of his favorite books is a Tibetan Buddhist text called The Voice of the Silence. And he has done many other studies into Buddhism that have allowed him to bring us today this story and presentation. Kirk?
Well, thank you very much, Renee. And here we go. So, silence and soul memory. It's actually a very profound topic, and one which we will only be skimming the surface of today, especially from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective. And one of the reasons that I specifically asked Renee to announce this as being from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is that, as you often hear the Dalai Lama say, that Tibetan Buddhism includes all the major schools of Buddhism, the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana. So it does not exclude any of them, and considers all of the texts that are part of those great traditions to be part of the Tibetan Buddhist canon. And it's also, I kind of discovered in the process here that this particular image, which is that of Amitabha Buddha at the Byodo-in Temple in Kaneohe, there in Hawaii, it is a Mahayana temple. It's a replica of a Mahayana temple that's in Kyoto, Japan, and the presiding statue or image there is not a replica of the image of the one in Japan, but it's a very similar depiction of Amitabha Buddha, who is in the Mahayana tradition, it's referred to as a kind of a supreme Buddha, not a Buddha that was incarnated specifically at one specific time, but who is kind of like a logos, a kind of celestial figure and center of awakened consciousness from which many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas emanate and descend into incarnation, which is a very key idea both in Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhism. So it turns out to be a very appropriate image for our talk. And you might also be wondering, well, if we're talking about soul memory, in what sense is that appropriate to the Buddhist tradition? Because don't they kind of exclude the idea of the soul as there's no permanent sense of self or immortal self to each being. So that's part of what we're going to try and unravel today. But when looking at this theme more closely, we realized that it actually fits very nicely with the threefold division of the Buddhist path itself, which is that of prajna, samadhi, and shila, ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And there's a very nice correlation between each of these. And since actually the last talk, you can think of this as being a continuation of both talks that I've already given, because the last talk I gave was on meditation. So today I don't have to cover the silence part. And in previous presentations in the GEMS video casts and Zoom meetings, we've had many presentations on the ethics associated with Shila, kind of the base, the very basis from which the superstructure of the path is built. So I'm considering those two parts covered for us today already. And so that we're basically just looking at prajna, or wisdom, and what is prajna as being, and I'm equating it with soul memory. So again, this was, you may remember this slide, which I showed last time, the threefold division of the eightfold path, also connected with various aspects of the Tibetan stupa. And also how prajna is one of the three antidotes that in the Buddhist perspective, much of life is plagued by three, what are called the three poisons, that of ignorance, attachment or desire, and hatred. But each of those poisons has an antidote, and the antidote to ignorance is prajna, or wisdom. And also, I just wanted to point out that this is not something, of course, that's unique to the Buddhist tradition, that in the Hindu tradition, there is that path referred to in the Bhagavad Gita as Jnana Marga. It's the path of wisdom or knowledge, which goes along with the other two kind of archetypal subdivisions of the path, that's Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga. And actually, all of them involve jnana, all of them involve knowledge. And then in the Egyptian tradition, the path of wisdom was symbolized by Thoth, the ibis-headed deity, the god of wisdom. In the Pythagorean tradition, philosophia refers to that very same path, that very same source of wisdom that the spiritual aspirant is attempting to realize. In the Judeo-Christian, there's the term gnosis, meaning knowledge, and Sophia, meaning wisdom. And then in the Islamic tradition, both traditional Islam and the Sufi tradition, which is the mystical dimension of Islam, dhikr is the term used for remembrance of the divine. So again, there's that aspect of recalling, recollection, as Socrates said in the one of the quotes for today, I believe, is that all learning is recollection, and he's referring to the deepest type of learning. And then finally, I threw in the Alexandrian philosophers, Theosophia, which means divine wisdom, which in that tradition is the underlying, you could say, bedrock of truth and wisdom that is behind every tradition. And though it's expressed in different ways in different traditions, that there is this unity and continuity of principles and of knowledge that can be discovered, can be studied, and eventually known. And also prajna is, there's another manner in which the entire Buddhist path is characterized. As an alternate to the eightfold path, there's the sevenfold prajna, or not prajna, but paramita path, which culminates in prajna as being the seventh of the sevenfold path, which is, paramita means excellences. We might call them virtues. They're also, one of the words that's used to translate it, paramita is perfections, seven perfections. And each of the seven, which I'm not going to go into any detail about today, but each of the seven is in turn sevenfold. So when we talked about this a little bit in relation to the eightfold path, that, for example, Shanti there on the bottom right, that is patience, patience sweet, that naught can ruffle. But that cannot be fully realized in its ultimate character without the realization of prajna. And similarly, or you could say vice versa, prajna cannot be fully realized without Shanti as being one of its aspects. And these are, and this helps to put it in the context of knowledge as virtue, that this is not like intellectual knowledge merely, although it can begin, and I'll talk about that. But ultimately, it has to do with the process of becoming. In this sevenfold character of prajna, the highest level of that knowing is referred to as jnana, which is, again, we saw that word in relation to the Hindu tradition, which means a non-dual realization. And you heard me talk about this last time in relation to meditation also. It's a kind of direct seeing, a direct knowing. So it's not something read in a book. It's not something someone told you is true. It's seeing, perceiving, and ultimately unifying with that which is true. Prajna has many levels of meaning, and the first would be simply intellectual comprehension of the teaching. That would be, a beginning level of knowing in the Buddhist tradition. But again, as we say, it ultimately, through many stages and through the threefold or sevenfold perfections associated with this path, it ultimately becomes the union between the perceiver and that which one is attempting to perceive or understand. And in the Buddhist tradition, we know that that is also what leads to nirvana. But in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, as most of you know, that nirvana, the realization of nirvana, again, this links up with the idea of a state of becoming. A realization is becoming. That it means, nirvana, one of the meanings is release from the cycle of birth and death. But in the Tibetan tradition, it's important to emphasize, and also Mahayana tradition, in release from unconscious birth and death, because part of what the bodhisattva does is not only reaches the other shore, which again is another way of expressing this idea of prajna, but returning back and maintaining the capability at each step of the way of returning back, as it said the great ones have done, in order to ferry others across the waters of samsara. In this highest conception of nirvana, which you find in the both in Mahayana and Tibetan sutras, there is a surpassing of even that duality that we think of between nirvana and samsara, and of course between self and other. So it is no longer one individual helping, incarnating on behalf of all other individuals, but it's the self incarnating on behalf of the self. It's there's a oneness there that has been achieved, and that is why the endless labors of the bodhisattva are in fact no labor. It's said in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, because there is no longer any self and other. Again, from the Buddhist perspective, the fundamental problem, the reason that life is suffering, as Buddha said, is because we've forgotten who we are and why we are here. So we are like this Martian who's landed in his spaceship and he's having a senior moment. He's forgotten who he is and why he's there. In the very first teaching, actually it was the second discourse of the Buddha, called the Anatta doctrine, he described why it is we are obscured, why it is we have forgotten. It is because we have placed a false sense of identity in the skandhas. And the skandhas are these 5 heaps, or the literal translation of the word is heaps or aggregates, which temporarily coalesce to form a given transitory personality. The rupa is both the physical form or more subtle forms of human nature. Vedana has to do with feelings and sensations that we have, all kinds, sajna, sensory perception, and conceptualization. So all sense information that comes to us through our engagement with what we think of as being the external world. The sanskaras, which are mental impulses, usually having to do with a personal will, wanting to do something, tendencies and predilections, and vijnana, which is a way of referring to a certain type of consciousness, but that always related to sensory consciousness mainly. And that's why there's 6 different types of vijnana related to the 5 senses and the mind, and many subdivisions in the Tibetan, in all Buddhist traditions, actually. All types of lower memory are associated with the 5 skandhas, but nowhere in those skandhas, as the Buddha pointed out, can the I be located, the self or the soul. That if we properly analyze and repeatedly look at carefully, with our best discrimination, we look at each of those skandhas, we'll find that there's nothing permanent in any of those, that they're continually in a process of change. And so there's nothing that we can call the self or the soul in those skandhas, but yet we identify with them. We think of ourselves as them. And the classic example there is the analysis of the cart. What is it that you're calling the cart? Is it the wheels? Is it the bed that the driver is sitting on? Is it the portion that latches to the ox? Which part of it is the cart? If you start to take all those parts apart, you say, well, without the wheel, the cart couldn't really move. So the cart, you could say, is really the wheel. But where did the wheel come from? Who made the wheel? And so that each thing is, it's this doctrine of dependent origination. Everything, if it's properly analyzed, you realize there's an infinite sequence of causes and conditions which led to that thing appearing to us as being existing in its own right. But nothing exists in its own right. Everything is dependent upon this infinite series of and interdependent relationships, which go beyond what the mind can even apprehend in terms of their original source, the first cause. And so it's helpful, if we're going to talk about the soul in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, to bring up this concept of manas, because it is a term that in fact includes both those higher states of consciousness, which are associated with enlightenment, and those lower states, which are associated with the skandhas. So at the lowest level of manas, which in the Buddhist tradition is referred to as the coarse mind or the lower mind, there are at least 2 types of memory that we could talk about: remembrance and recollection. But we should also always remember that the skandhas are by nature tainted by the poisons of ignorance, grasping, and hatred, and primarily by this what we call egotism, this identity with that which is ever passing away. But then there's also the level of the subtle mind, which in the Buddhist tradition there's many terms associated with it, but I've just put 2 here. Alaya Vijnana is a very evocative term, the storehouse of consciousness. It is that level of knowing and of consciousness which retains even the experiences, the essential experiences, and the detailed experiences of previous lives. So it's sort of like that big basket of honey that we've collected over many lives, and the learning that's been garnered that is stored there. And that is why learning is recollection, because true learning is tapping into that honey source. And another term for it is sutratma, as being the thread soul, that thread which provides continuity from life to life, and also provides that responsibility, karmic responsibility for acts and thoughts committed in one life, coming over and affecting the next life. And the memory associated with that is reminiscence, or in the Greek term anamnesis, which is associated with the Socratic doctrine, again, this recall of past wisdom. But there's still, at the lower levels of the subtle mind, there is still the problem of egotism, that is, or it's also referred to as ahamkara, this the subtle sense of still being a separate soul, my soul, your soul. Yes, I'm an immortal soul going through many lives, but my soul's better than your soul. That's it. Can be still a problem at this level of the subtle mind, and therefore there's this what is the higher state, or the highest state, although it also has subdivisions, referred to as the Tathagata Garbha. It's the Buddha nature. The memory associated with that is said to be omniscient, non-dual, and includes both wisdom, which sees to the very heart of things, to the heart of life, both cosmic and human, and compassion. So it's this identity with the whole of life at the same time. So it's a transcendent wisdom, but also retains that immanent aspect. And all egotism has been overcome, as we mentioned before. There is no more self and other. So the two types of lower memory that we mentioned, we're all familiar with these. One is remembrance, is when an idea occurs without a specific, sensory input arising. So we might, so it's like a kind of intellectual, you might say, recall of a past event, experience, or knowledge does not have a sensory stimulus which evoked it. And then recollection is when, whether it's a sensory experience or an idea, and through that one idea, we begin to recall other events or experiences or knowledge that are associated with it. And that's referred to as recollection. But then we can also talk about types of memory associated with the subtle mind. The lower being starting at the top, which we've all had those feelings of deja vu, a feeling of having been here before, right? Of having experienced something before, or knowing someone without being able to recall necessarily, or having it happened in this life, but being convinced that this is a relationship we're re-entering into. Conscience is another aspect of, you could say, message from the subtle mind. Intuition is, which again, we probably all have moments of intuition. And this has many levels in itself. And in fact is one, even though for most of us, it's relatively vague. It may not be this direct, clear, sighted, and irrefutable knowing, but that it is in fact that faculty which eventually develops into and is cultivated by the highest forms of samadhi and the culmination of prajna. And then there's specific recall of past life experiences, which I don't know if any of you have, but I'm going to give you an example in just a minute. And then there's the recall, which the Buddha is said to have realized on the Night of Enlightenment, which is the recall of his entire series of past incarnations in this cycle, in this kalpa. It's remarkable even to think about that. And that is one of the aspects of prajna, apparently. And we do run into it. We do see that even in Sir Edwin Arnold's summation of that Night of Enlightenment, which we'll go to in just a few minutes. But I wanted to mention that starting around the early 1900s, there was very systematic studies and documentation done by William James and his colleague F.W.H. Myers, and a great deal written about persons who had recall, past life recall, along with a whole other series of phenomena, which we would call spiritual, noetic perceptions, various paranormal psychological events like clairvoyance, clairaudience, and so on, besides reincarnation. And both of these gentlemen compiled was really very carefully and systematically a great deal of cases associated with that. And then in the early 1960s, Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, an American, began to hear about and document in a systematic way children in all parts of the world who had past life recall. And his final book, which was completed the year he passed away, is Children Who Remember Previous Lives, which I would highly recommend. It's a very insightful book, which it's a very overview of his work. A lot of his earlier pieces were kind of aimed at the scientific community, and so they're very technical. And he goes into a lot of detail with photographs and careful analysis about each aspect and how they went through their studies and so on. But this one is more for the general reader, and it's a wonderful read. And he passed away in 2007, but he's been succeeded by a Dr. Jim Tucker, also at the University of Virginia, doing the same work. And one of the most remarkable cases that Tucker reviewed and carefully analyzed. So part of the process is they would hear about these children. People would call them or send them letters saying, my child apparently is having past life recollections, keeps talking about them. And then they would go and interview the children and the parents. And then they would do research looking at historic documents, police records, newspaper reports, and actually go to those places, in some cases, where they believed their previous life occurred, in order to verify to see if it could be verified, the events that they say took place. And this one child, James Linegar, was documented on Fox News and ABC, and a whole number of documentations which you can find online still on YouTube. I'm just going to play this little short segment.
Pilot on a mission over the Pacific was shot down by Japanese artillery. His name might well have been forgotten, were it not for the remarkable, some might say unbelievable story of a little boy named James.
Okay, this is really tough. I need somebody to help me.
All right, I'm the volunteer. What do you want me to do?
Okay, I'm just gonna climb this thing and you have to hold me in case I fall.
Done. James Linegar is all boy, 6 years old and full of spirit. This is a special plane. It goes in reverse. You don't see a lot of that. James knows a lot about planes, especially war planes.
What kind of airplane is that?
The Corsair.
His parents, Andrea and Bruce Linegar, say from an early age, James would play with nothing else.
He was obsessed with airplanes. If you look around the house, that's all you'll see. Airplanes, helicopters, aircraft carriers.
But then, when he was 2, the planes James loved suddenly began to give him frequent and frightening nightmares.
I'd wake him up and he'd be screaming, and he'd always be laying on his back, kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And I'd say, baby, what were you dreaming about? And he'd say, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out.
They sound like typical kiddie nightmares, but Andrea says they went on the same way for months. Maybe too much TV. But James was just 2, and his parents say only watching Barney and Teletubbies.
Teletubbies!
And Andrea and Bruce say they weren't watching World War II documentaries or conversing about military history. This is an F-18?
No, that one.
So what explains the nightmares and James's strange obsession with airplanes?
I talked to my mom about it a lot of times. My mom had said maybe he's remembering a past life.
What did you say?
Politely, baloney.
Andrea and Bruce of Lafayette, Louisiana are a highly educated, modern couple. To them, the possibility that their little son James was manifesting signs of a former life was, well, a little out there.
You know, having a past life is not the initial conclusion that you come to. You try and figure out any other way he could have. Did he see anything? Has there ever been anything on television, anything that we've discussed?
But as time went by, Andrea didn't know what to believe. Here's James at age 3, going over a plane as if he's doing a pre-flight check. He would continue to say and do things that were puzzling, like the time his mom bought him a toy airplane.
And I said, oh, look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it. He said, that's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank.
A drop tank?
I'd never heard of a drop tank. I didn't know what a drop tank was.
Andrea's mother suggested.
Anyway, it's worth watching. It's remarkable. It goes on to document how they discovered who this boy was in a previous life, that he not only named the plane, where it was shot down, he identified it on a map where it was shot down over Iwo Jima. He knew the other pilots on the boat that it took off from. He could name them by name. And they went, there was one survivor pilot on that boat who he eventually became friends with, and who it was convinced that the boy was a reincarnation of this, because he knew things that there's no other way that he could have known otherwise. So, and it's so easily accessible on YouTube. So if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it. So I've already used all of my time, and we haven't gotten to the Night of Enlightenment.
I don't think you can let us hang. Maybe you better do a little bit at least of the Night of Enlightenment.
There's many versions of this. One version that I've returned to again and again because it's so beautifully written is that of by Sir Edwin Arnold. So he in the sixth book or sixth chapter, he starts off by saying that the Buddha, after having kind of gone to the extremes in terms of asceticism, was given a bowl of rice by a maiden, and in defiance of what the other ascetics who he was meditating with thought was right, he ate the rice, and it revived him sufficiently for him to resolve that he would sit down under the Bodhi tree and not get up until he had solved that final stainless answer to the question of suffering. And but one of the things that happens is, so Arnold describes it in terms of 7 watches, but the first 2 are presided over by Mara. And who is Mara? Mara is all of those elements in our own nature which rally against enlightenment. He describes them as the demon armies clouding all the wind with thunder and with blinding lightning flung in jagged javelins of purple wrath. The 10 chief sins came, Mara's mighty ones, angels of evil, and the first one being Attavada, the sin which the Buddhists call the sin of separateness. The second being doubt, that is that voice in us which says it can't be done. There is no real answer. You're wasting your time. The demon of faith, which is interesting. It's that voice in us which prefers rituals or easy beliefs and dogmas as opposed to this like penetrating understanding of the truth. Desire, of course, what Arnold calls the king of passions, who finally, after a whole procession of these desirable females, finally takes the shape of Yashodhara, which is his beautiful wife, who is, pleading with him to, rejoin her and enjoy the comfort of her arms and her love. And then that's followed by hate, the lust of days, the lust of fame, pride, fear, ignorance. There's fear again, there's fear twice. Also, part of this is sort of that archetypal process that we might experience even each time we go to sit to meditate, is all of those things which rally against, rear their ugly head, and want to draw us away from that which we have committed ourselves to do. And in the third watch, this is where we enter that, once having conquered Mara, the Buddha enters this state of peace and rest in which this vision, this capacity for seeing into the depths of nature begins to manifest. And in the third watch, the earth being still, the hellish legions fled, a soft air breathing from the sinking moon, our Lord attained Sama Sambuddha. That's the Pali word for Samyak Sambuddha, meaning the recollection of all past incarnations. He saw by light which shines beyond our mortal ken the line of all his lives in all the worlds, far back and farther back, and yet farthest. Even as one at rest upon a mountain summit marks his path, wind up by precipice and crag. So as though he's standing at the pinnacle of a mountain, looking back over the entire way that he's come. And he's seen the process of evolution, that immortal thread, that sutratma, which carried him through many lives, the path which it needed to take in order to reach where he was. So he sees that life's upward steps long lead from levels low where breath is based to higher slopes and higher where on the 10 great virtues wait to lead the climber skyward. So the 10, these would again be the paramitas, which is another, 10 is another formulation of the 7, or then also sometimes it's the 6, but it's often and most often spoken of as the 8-fold path. Also, Buddha saw how new life reaps what the old life did sow. That is karma. He saw the working of the law of karma through those lives, how each life good begets more good, evil, fresh evil. And then this term abhijna, which is an equivalent of prajna or jnana. In the middle watch, our Lord attained insight vast, ranging beyond this sphere to spheres unnamed, system on system, countless worlds and suns, moving in splendid measures, band by band, linked in division, one yet separate, the silver islands of a sapphire sea. So it's as though he's seeing not just the origins and birth of our world and maybe even our cosmos, but the coming and going of worlds and cosmos. And he's seen them in detail. As we find out, as you go deeper into the philosophy, you realize that he was understanding and knowing in detail the emergence of how a system of worlds emerges and how beings come to be and progress in a cycle of evolution on those worlds. He saw lords of light who hold their worlds by bonds invisible. This is a very deep teaching in regards to what is called the Dhyani Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. The logoic light we mentioned earlier in relation to Amitabha, it's a 7-fold division of centers of enlightened consciousness, by which worlds come into being. So it's an emanation process. It's not creation like we think of in the Christian tradition, God apart creating, but these divine beings who are through differentiation and emanation, entering into and becoming the cosmos. And that's why it's said that all of nature is the Buddha nature. And then in the 4th watch, he also sees the 4 noble truths, which you find the Dalai Lama, Tsongkhapa, and other the greatest teachers of the Tibetan tradition, saying that the entire scope and range of the Buddhist path and of the teaching, the entire teaching, the whole canon, if one could understand it properly, we would know that it's contained in these 4. As that awakening, that full realization associated with prajna and jnana completed itself, it's apparent, it's depicted as happening just as the earliest dawn lights were arising. And in that divinest daybreak, Arnold says, all evil hearts grew gentle. So there was this kind of universal impact to the realization that took place. And in fact, you find this even in the Hinayana sutras, the Theravada sutras, that it's not just the story about one guy on this planet, realizing something important about some truth about life on this planet, but it had a universal impact. And on our planet, those at war called truce, sick man leaped, laughing from beds of pain. So there was this healing ambrosial light that affected everything, including all kingdoms of nature. And in the final passages of this 6th chapter, he describes Buddha arising from that meditation and his first words. Then he arose radiant, rejoicing, strong. beneath the tree, and lifting high his voice, spake this, in hearing of all times and worlds. So again, it's this idea that the Buddha gave this great turning to the wheel. It's called referred to as a Chakra Vartan. So it's affecting all times and worlds. Many a house of life hath held me, seeking ever him who wrought these prisons of the senses. Again, that's Mara. Sorrow fraught, sore was my ceaseless strife on behalf of others. But now, thou builder of this tabernacle, thou, I know thee. Never shalt thou build again these walls of pain, nor raise the roof tree of deceits, nor lay fresh rafters on the clay. Broken thy house is, and the ridge pole split. Delusion fashioned it. Safe pass I thence, deliverance to obtain.
Kirk, that was really stupendous. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Dana, did you have a question you might want to make or a comment?
Sam, also just feel blissful after hearing Kirk's, why am I not there? Why we are waiting for, I mean, all this, the way you described the 4 watches, and are they all coming from Edmund Arnold's book? Are you quoting the same book?
Yes, that all those last passages, that was all from his book. Yes, yeah. Just it's a magnificent read. It's available, in paperback. It was released in the last part of the 1800s. Actually, it's one of the first books that came to the U.S. that described the life of the Buddha, and it was published in many editions, both in Europe and the US. It was a hit when it first came out. And it's one of those books that, was like this great awakening that began in the Western mind in relation to the tremendous treasures that the East held.
So it's Sir Edwin Arnold's The Light of Asia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also wondered, you talked about reincarnation and the American authors that I'm aware of, and I'm familiar with them. And also wanted to add one name, if you have not looked at that book, Marjorie Woolacott. She works with this Virginia group, and she's my good friend from Oregon, and she's working on that project as well. And I posted it in the chat, her name. But you didn't mention His Holiness the Dalai Lama for the reincarnation thesis or premise, or did I miss something? I was late 5 minutes. So
No, you didn't miss anything, and I, there's so many things I left out that I wanted to mention. But I'm glad you asked about it, because his first book, which I adore, which is called My Land and My People. It's autobiographical. One of the things he describes is the whole process by which he is recognized as being the reincarnation of his predecessor, the 13th Dalai Lama. And this is, of course, this is an ancient tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, right? The whole idea of lamas or tulkus is that they're conscious reincarnations of a previous monk or teacher, right? And there is a whole systematic way in which they identify when a child is very young that they are indeed the reincarnation. It's not guesswork. But he describes, for example, that when his predecessor passed away, that they carefully watch what happens with the corpse. And in his case, what happened is that the head turned in a certain direction of its own accord, and there was some mold that grew on the table on which the corpse was sitting. And so they knew that gave them certain clues about where to go to seek for a vision about his next incarnation. And then there was a whole troop of monks who went to this sacred lake, and over a course of days or weeks, through meditation and various processes, ritualistic processes, I imagine, they had visions of where to go. So then an expedition was sent out, and they identified the home by the color of the roof that some of the other monks had seen in the vision. And indeed, when they went to the house, they found that a boy had been recently born. At that point, it was 2 or 3 years after the Dalai Lama had passed away. 2-year-old boy who was very monk-like, acting in a very monk-like way. That is, repeating passages from sacred texts, sitting as though he was sitting in meditation, and various things. And part of what they did is they brought items that the previous Dalai Lama used, personal items, like a begging bowl and a rosary and some other things. And they had almost identical items as well. And they present both the authentic items and the identical items to the child. And in each case, the child took what was actually his in the previous life. And so there's a whole series of things that they use to, like that, tests that they run to confirm that that it is reincarnation. And then there's also the story about how as
Kirk,
these monks, yes, sorry.
I'm just going to since we're getting near the end,
Yes.
I want to make sure we get to everybody.
Sure,
and I
sure.
see that River has
Anyway.
his hand up.
I highly recommend the book, but thank you for the question, Nina.
Hey, thanks, Renee. Thank you, Kirk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm one of the people in this community that was able to reach nirvana in this lifetime, knowing nothing of Buddhism. And I spend 85% of my time in samadhi, still or moving. And over time, I've been able to kind of notice in Taoism and Hinduism and Buddhism that they're all completely make sense. It totally makes sense. And yet they're woefully inadequate as well, right? Or else everybody would suddenly reach nirvana. But there's just this one concept of emptiness or anatta that threw me at first. It didn't make sense. And I've learned over time that the Buddha was actually talking about the no self is actually just the soul beyond egoic identity. And it's the soul you can only be dissolved in, but it still holds me and it still guides me. There's just no container. There's no suffering. All of the egoic stuff of the higher mind and lower mind is gone. But that highest mana, I think I was just confused for a long time about that word emptiness. And I'll post something in the chat here from my resource of kind of the Buddha going into the actual experience of emptiness is there. So I just wanted to preface that and say hi and thank you for bringing all the scholarly stuff to us, because I know nothing of scholarly stuff, unfortunately. I just have my own experience to contribute in dialogue with the community here. But thank you very much.
We didn't touch on that very key concept of shunyata or emptiness. We did talk about it a little bit when we spoke about meditation, but one of the, in my mind, one of the keys to understanding that concept is it's not at all emptiness as we're typically used to thinking of it. That it is, it's void because it transcends any finite conception that consciousness might want to cling to it. It's like is said in the Upanishads regarding the absolute, that any definition you give to it is going to limit it. Even infinite space, that's going in our minds, it's going to limit the nature of it in our thought. And that shunyata transcends all limitations and transcends all finite consciousness. And it also includes what is called the boundless plenum, right? It is also that from which countless universes can come into being. So it is that, you could say that ground, that unifying ground which unifies even, our cosmos to the next cosmos that's going to occur. So it has that entirely transcendent aspect to it, but it is also an infinite source from which cosmos, universes can come and go. So it has that, divine potentiality, unbounded potentiality aspect to it. And that is why any object that you look at and you analyze properly in relation to the skandhas and that which transcends the skandhas, you ultimately trace it back to what's called the void or emptiness. And the Dalai Lama does say in his wonderful little book called How to See Things as They Really Are, that you need both the analytic mind and the mind which can apprehend, the meditative mind, which can apprehend that boundlessness of Shunyata. You also need the analytic mind, and it's only by that a repeated and very concerted effort to analyze and see things in terms of their dependent origination, that you will eventually reach a point where even when you view phenomena, you will see it as the void, and that's because you're seeing its ultimate nature. So that's where this, and it sounds trivial to say that, but we're talking about the highest stages of enlightenment, right? Where even perceiving phenomenal existence, you're also seeing the void. So the two are coming together, samsara and nirvana.
Oh, beautiful answer. Yeah. Cliff.
Oh, thank you. Gosh, Kirk, that was just an amazing presentation. I learned a whole lot right there. The question that just jumped out at me is when you were talking about various forms of soul memory, you were listing like deja vu, and then you also listed conscience as part of soul memory. And I'm thinking, like in Tibetan Buddhism, they often relate prajna and karuna, wisdom and compassion, or knowledge and ethics. But I was wondering if you could just go more into detail about how conscience can be part of soul memory.
Right. It's a good question. There's, and we've got 2 minutes.
Sorry.
No, that's right. Well, here's the way I think about it in just a few sentences, that assuming we have lived many lives, we've all been on the path to one degree or another, and maybe we've fallen off, and maybe we're at a low point right now, but at some point we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to get back to where we were, and so we have the experience and knowledge of many lives. The estimate given a certain world period is somewhere around 10,000 for each of us. So that knowledge is there, and at certain points in our experience, it leaks through into our conscious awareness, despite ourselves. So we may be relatively trapped in a limited conception of self, but we may go to perform some action, and suddenly we'll get this flash. Oh, this is wrong. I should not be doing this. This is going to be injurious to others. It's going to be harming. It's disregarding the sacredness of nature, what have you. There's a moral current that enters into consciousness, which where we suddenly realize, that which I thought was going to be okay to do, it's not okay to do. And that's one aspect of the voice of conscience, which you could say it is that higher nature, that Sutratma, speaking to the conscious mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes, beautiful. Is there anyone who spontaneously would love to give a vote of thanks to Kirk before we close? I'm happy to do so. I am really so appreciative of the depth of scholarship that is really, really, really infused by Kirk with care. he's only doing this because he wants so much to share with us what has been shared with him, and for the sake of all of humanity, and I believe all of the cosmos. And so that so clearly comes through in your presentation, Kirk, how much you care. And and that care goes down right to the details. Kirk is an artist and an architect. So even when we're looking at each of those beautiful slides, they're just so gorgeously presented. They are pleasing to the soul. I believe for me, it arouses soul memory. Just looking at something that is so beautiful and so symbolic, it seems to shine through more clearly. Just by the way it was presented with such care and on the heart and mind level. So in so many ways, I think I speak for all of us in thanking you, Kirk, for the breadth and depth of these points that you've shared with us today in regard to the Buddha and enlightenment. Really, thank you so much.
Well, I really enjoyed it. And again, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and your attendance. Aloha.
Thank you,
Aloha.
Kirk.
Thank you, everyone.
Mahalo, Kirk.
Thank you.
Yes,
Mahalo, Kirk. Aloha.
Kirk, I see.